Hello, English learners! In today's episode, you're going to train several powerful skills at the same time. Your English listening, your understanding of fast, natural English conversations, and your ability to respond like a confident speaker. This lesson is designed to help you gradually move from basic English towards C1 and C2 level understanding, where conversations feel natural, quick, and effortless. Today, we're going to explore something extremely important for advanced fluency: understanding fast English conversations in daily life. Many learners study grammar and vocabulary for years, but when they hear native speakers talking quickly in real situations, they suddenly feel lost. The words seem to connect together, sentences move quickly, and it becomes difficult to follow the conversation. In this lesson, we will train your ears and your mind so that fast English becomes clearer and easier to understand. Throughout this video, I will guide you through many realistic daily life conversations, situations you may experience at work, while traveling, when meeting friends, during phone calls, or even in simple everyday moments, like ordering coffee or asking for directions. These examples will help you recognize how natural English really sounds. When people speak quickly and naturally, you will also practice thinking and responding in English like a native, whiny speaker. Instead of translating in your mind, you will learn to understand meaning instantly and react naturally in conversation. This is one of the key differences between intermediate learners and truly fluent speakers. As we go through the lesson, I will also give you short practice exercises. Sometimes, I will ask you to listen carefully to a sentence. Sometimes, I will ask you to repeat after me. And sometimes, you will imagine yourself inside the conversation and respond naturally. These small practice moments are very powerful. They help train your brain to process English faster and more confidently. By the end of this video, you will feel much more comfortable understanding natural English conversations. You will notice how native speakers connect words, shorten expressions, and use everyday phrases that textbooks often don't teach. Little by little, your listening speed will improve, your reactions will become faster, and your English will start to feel more natural. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our daily English learning lessons. Every video on this channel is designed to help you become a stronger and more confident English speaker. Now, take a deep breath, relax your mind, and if you like, keep a pen and paper nearby so you can write down useful phrases that you hear during the lesson. All right, let's begin practicing together. Let's start with something very important for advanced English fluency: understanding how fast English conversations really sound in daily life. Many learners believe they need more vocabulary or more grammar to reach a higher level. But in reality, one of the biggest challenges at the C1 and C2 level is simply keeping up with the speed and rhythm of natural English conversations. Native speakers often connect words, shorten phrases, and speak with natural emotion, which can make sentences sound very different from the English you read in textbooks. When you train your ears to recognize these natural patterns, something interesting happens. Suddenly, conversations start to feel clearer, and your brain begins to understand meaning almost instantly. Instead of translating word by word, imagine you are walking into a small cafe in the morning, before work. The environment is busy, people are ordering coffee, someone is chatting with the barista, and two friends are talking at a nearby table. When native speakers talk in situations like this, their conversations move quickly, but naturally, listen to this example in your mind. One person says, "Hey, good morning. I didn't expect to see you here this early." The other person responds casually, "Yeah, I had an early meeting downtown, so I figured I'd grab coffee first." Notice how natural that exchange feels. The sentences are not complicated, but the speed and rhythm can challenge learners who are not used to hearing real spoken English. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says to you, "Good morning. I didn't expect to see you here this early." Instead of pausing for a long time to think, a fluent speaker responds naturally and quickly. For example, you might say, "Yeah, I had to start work earlier today, so I thought I'd stop by for coffee before heading to the office." Try repeating that sentence slowly in your mind. "I had to start work earlier today, so I thought I'd stop by for coffee before heading to the office." Practicing sentences like this helps train your brain to produce natural responses without hesitation. Let's continue imagining another moment in the same cafe. A friend arrives and joins the conversation. One person says, "Hey, we were just talking about the new project at work. Have you heard anything about it yet?" The second person replies, "A little bit. I heard they're planning to launch it next month, but I'm not sure if the timeline will actually stay the same." This type of conversation is extremely common in daily life. People share small pieces of information, express uncertainty, and respond quickly, without thinking too much about grammar rules. The goal for you as a learner is to become comfortable understanding and responding to these types of conversations. Now, let's turn that moment into a short practice exercise. Imagine someone says to you, "Have you heard anything about the new project yet?" Think about how you might respond naturally. One possible answer could be, "Not much yet. I've heard a few people mention it, but I don't know many details." Another possible response might be, "Yay, I heard a little about it yesterday, but I'm still waiting to see how everything develops." Notice how both responses sound natural and relaxed. When you practice speaking like this, you begin to develop the rhythm of real English conversation. One important skill at the C1 and C2 level is learning how native speakers soften their statements. Instead of speaking in very direct or rigid sentences, fluent speakers often use small expressions that make their speech sound more natural. For example, someone might say, "I guess we'll see what happens," or "It looks like things might change soon," or "From what I've heard, they're still figuring things out." These expressions allow speakers to share opinions without sounding too absolute. Practicing these kinds of phrases will help your English sound more advanced and more natural. Let's imagine another daily life situation. You are talking with a colleague during a short break at work. Your colleague says, "You look a little tired today. Did you stay up late last night?" You respond casually, "Yeah, I ended up working on a few things at home, and before I knew it, it was already past midnight." Notice how the phrase, before I knew it appears in the sentence. This expression is very common in spoken English. It simply means that time passed quickly, without you realizing. Hock it. Now. Imagine the conversation continues. Your colleague says, "That happens to me all the time. I'll start watching a short video online, and suddenly 2 hours are gone." You might respond with something like, "Exactly. That's the dangerous part about the internet. You think you'll only spend a few minutes, but then time disappears." This kind of back-and-forth conversation is a perfect example of natural English rhythm, short statements, quick reactions, and shared experiences make conversations feel smooth and friendly. Let's turn this moment into another speaking exercise. Imagine someone says, "I started watching one short video, and suddenly 2 hours passed." How might you respond? One natural response could be, "Yeah, that happens to me more often than I'd like to admit." Another response could be, "I know exactly what you mean. It's way too easy to lose track of time online." Practicing multiple responses helps your brain become flexible when speaking English. Now, let's explore another daily situation where fast English often appears, casual conversations between friends. Imagine two friends meeting after not seeing each other for a while. One friend says, "Wow, it's been ages since we last caught up. How have you been?" The other friend replies warmly, "I've been pretty good actually. Work has been busy, but overall things are going well." Notice the phrase, "It's been ages." This expression simply means a long time, and it's commonly used in informal conversations. The conversation continues naturally. One friend asks, "So, what have you been working on lately?" The other responds, "Mostly the same projects as before, but recently I've been trying to learn a few new skills as well." This type of sentence shows how fluent speakers add extra information naturally. While speaking, they don't. They stop after one short answer. Instead, they expand their thoughts slightly to keep the conversation flowing. Now, it's your turn to imagine being in that conversation. Someone asks you, "What have you been working on lately?" Think about your response. You might say, "I've been focusing on improving my English and practicing every day." Or you might say, "I've been busy with work recently, but I'm also trying to learn new things whenever I have free time." These responses are simple but natural, and they help maintain a smooth conversation. Another useful ability for advanced English speakers is expressing small emotions during conversations. Native speakers often show interest, surprise, or agreement through short reactions. For example, someone might say, "That sounds interesting," or "That makes sense," or "I totally understand what you mean." These small reactions are extremely important because they make conversations feel interactive instead of one-sided. Imagine a conversation where someone tells you about a recent experience. They say, "Last weekend, I tried cooking a new recipe, and surprisingly, it turned out really well." You might respond with enthusiasm by saying, "Oh, nice! That must have felt pretty satisfying." The speaker might continue, "Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to work out that well, but now I'm thinking about trying a few more recipes." You could then reply, "That's a great idea. Once you start cooking regularly, it becomes a lot more fun." Let's practice responding again. Imagine someone tells you, I tried a new recipe, and it turned out great. Your response could be, That's awesome. What did you cook? Another response could be, Nice. I always feel proud. When a recipe actually works, these small conversational responses are essential for sounding natural. At higher levels of English fluency, conversations often move quickly because people connect ideas smoothly. For example, someone might say, I was planning to go to the gym this morning, but I ended up sleeping through my alarm. The phrase, ended up, is extremely common in spoken English. It shows how a situation turned out differently than expected. Understanding phrases like this helps you follow fast conversations more easily. Imagine responding to that sentence. Someone says, I was planning to go to the gym, but I ended up sleeping through my alarm. You might reply, Honestly, I've done that more times than I can count. Or you might say, Sometimes your body just needs the extra rest. Both responses sound relaxed and natural. Now, let's practice listening for meaning. Instead of focusing on every individual word, imagine someone says quickly, I thought about calling you yesterday, but things got a little hectic at work. Even if you miss one word, you can still understand the overall meaning. The speaker wanted to call, but work became busy. Training your brain to capture the overall message is one of the most important listening skills for advanced English learners. Let's expand that moment into a short conversation. One person says, I thought about calling you yesterday, but things got a little hectic at work. The other person responds, No worries at all. I figured you were probably busy. The first speaker then says, Yeah, it was one of those days where everything seemed to happen at once. This phrase, one of those days, is very common in natural English. It means a day when many unexpected or stressful things occur. Imagine how you might respond. If someone said that to you, you could say, I know exactly what you mean. Some days just feel overwhelming. Another response could be, Yeah, those kinds of days happen to everyone. These supportive responses help conversations feel friendly and natural. Another important element of advanced conversation is storytelling. Fluent speakers often share short stories about daily experiences. For example, someone might say, You won't believe what happened to me this morning. I was rushing to catch the bus, and just as I reached the stop, the bus drove away. A listener might respond with sympathy, saying, Oh no, that's the worst feeling. The speaker might continue, Yeah, but luckily another bus came about 10 minutes later. Let's practice responding to that story. Imagine someone tells you, I missed the bus this morning. A natural response could be, That's frustrating. Hopefully the next one came quickly. Another response might be, I hate when that happens. It always feels like the bus leaves at the exact moment you arrive. These kinds of conversational exchanges train your brain to react quickly and naturally. Over time, your responses become faster, your listening improves, and conversations feel more comfortable. One more quick situation before we continue further. Imagine you are talking with a friend about weekend plans. Your friend asks, Do you have anything interesting planned for the weekend? You might answer, Nothing too exciting, but I'm thinking about relaxing and catching up on a few things. Your friend might reply, that actually sounds pretty nice. Sometimes a quiet weekend is exactly what you need. This type of simple conversation appears everywhere in daily life, and mastering it is an important step toward advanced fluency. Now, take a moment and imagine someone asking you the same question. Do you have anything planned for the weekend? Try answering out loud. If you can, you might say, I'm planning to spend some time practicing English and maybe watching a movie. Or you might say, I don't have any big plans yet, but I'll probably relax and see what happens. Practicing answers like this helps your speaking become more natural and confident. As we continue through this lesson, you'll notice something interesting. The conversations themselves are not extremely complicated. What makes them challenging is the speed, the rhythm, and the natural expressions that native speakers use. Once you begin recognizing these patterns, your understanding improves quickly. Now, we will explore more daily life conversations where people speak quickly, share opinions, and react naturally to each other. You'll continue practicing how to understand the flow of fast English and how to respond smoothly in real conversations. Let's continue building your ability to understand fast English conversations by stepping into another very common daily situation. Meeting someone unexpectedly during a busy day. Imagine you are walking down the street when you suddenly see a friend you haven't spoken to for a while. Your friend smiles and says, Hey, I didn't realize you were in this area today. You respond naturally, Yeah, I had a few errands to run nearby, so I thought I'd stop by this neighborhood for a bit. Conversations like this usually begin casually, and fluent speakers immediately adjust their tone to match the situation. Your friend might continue by asking, So, how have things been going lately? This question is extremely common in everyday English. It's not asking for one specific detail. Instead, it invites a short update about your life. A natural response might be, Things have been pretty good overall. I've been staying busy with work, but I'm also trying to spend more time improving my English. When you respond with a little extra information, it keeps the conversation flowing smoothly. Now, imagine the conversation continues. Your friend nods and says, That sounds great. Staying busy can actually be a good thing sometimes. You might respond with agreement by saying, Yeah, I think so too. When you stay active and keep learning new things, time feels more meaningful. Notice how the conversation remains simple but expressive. Fluent speakers often share small thoughts like this. Instead of giving short answers that stop the conversation, let's turn this moment into a quick speaking practice. Imagine someone asks you, How have things been going lately? Think of a natural answer. You might say, They've been going pretty well. I've been focusing on improving my skills and learning new things. Another response could be, Honestly, things have been a little busy recently, but overall, I can't complain. Practicing responses like these helps you react faster when conversations happen in real life. Now, let's move into another realistic situation, a conversation between coworkers during a short break. One person says, I feel like this week has gone by incredibly fast. The other person responds, I know exactly what you mean. It feels like Monday was just yesterday. This type of comment is very common in daily conversation because people often talk about how quickly time passes. Imagine you join this conversation. Someone says, "This week went by really fast." You might respond with something like, "Yeah, time seems to move faster when you're busy." Or you might say, "That's true. Sometimes I don't even realize how quickly the days are passing." These responses show agreement and keep the conversation moving naturally. Let's continue the scene. One coworker says, "Do you have anything planned after work today?" The other person replies, "Not really. I'm thinking about relaxing at home and maybe watching a movie." Notice how the phrase "not really" softens the answer. Instead of simply saying no, speakers often use expressions like "not really," "not at the moment," or "nothing special" to sound more natural. Now, imagine someone asks you the same question. "Do you have anything planned after work today?" Think about your response. You might say, "Nothing special. I'll probably relax for a while and catch up on a few things." Another possible answer could be, "I might go for a walk later, but I haven't decided yet." Both responses sound casual and natural in everyday conversation. Now, let's focus on something important for understanding fast English: connected speech. When native speakers talk quickly, they often connect words together so that the sentence sounds smoother. For example, the phrase, "What are you doing later?" may sound more like, "What you doing later?" in very fast casual speech. This doesn't mean the grammar changes. It simply means the pronunciation becomes more relaxed and connected. Imagine a friend asking you quickly, "What you doing later?" The meaning is still clear, even though the words are shortened. A natural response could be, "I'm not sure yet. I might meet a friend or just stay home and relax." Practicing these types of sentences helps your ear adjust to the rhythm of real conversations. Now, let's explore another everyday moment, talking about plans for the weekend. A friend says, "I've been looking forward to the weekend all week." The other person laughs and replies, "Same here. I think everyone feels that way by Friday afternoon." These small shared experiences make conversations feel friendly and natural. Imagine your friend continues speaking. They say, "Do you usually plan your weekends in advance? Or do you just decide things at the last minute?" That's a thoughtful question that invites a longer answer. You might respond by saying, "Most of the time, I just decide things as they come. I like keeping my weekends flexible." Another natural answer could be, "Sometimes I plan a few things ahead of time, but I also like leaving room for spontaneous plans." Let's practice this together. Imagine someone asks you, "Do you plan your weekends in advance?" Try answering out loud. You might say, "Sometimes I do, but usually I just see how I feel when the weekend arrives." Or you might say, "Sai, I prefer planning a little bit, so I don't waste the whole weekend doing nothing." Speaking these sentences helps your brain become more comfortable with spontaneous responses. Now, let's explore a situation that happens often when people are discussing daily routines. One person says, "I've been trying to wake up earlier in the morning lately." The other person responds, "That's a good habit to build. Early mornings can be really productive." Notice how the conversation includes encouragement. Fluent speakers often support each other's goals during casual discussions. Imagine you join this conversation. Someone tells you they are trying to wake up earlier. You might respond with interest by saying, "That's great. Have you noticed any difference in your daily routine? The speaker might reply, actually, yes. I feel like I have more time to focus before the day becomes busy. You could then respond, that makes sense. Starting the day calmly can really help your productivity. Let's practice another quick response. Imagine someone says, I'm trying to wake up earlier these days. You might respond, that's a really good habit to develop. Another response could be, I've thought about doing that too, but it's not always easy. These types of responses help conversations feel balanced and engaging. Now, let's look at another natural conversation pattern, expressing mild surprise. Imagine someone tells you, I started reading a new book yesterday, and I ended up finishing half of it in one evening. You might respond with surprise by saying, wow, it must be a really interesting book. The speaker might reply, yeah, the story is so engaging that it's hard to stop reading. Let's turn this into a listening practice moment. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, I started reading this book last night, and before I knew it, I'd read half the thing. Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning is still clear. The speaker began reading and unexpectedly continued for a long time. Now, imagine you respond to that story. You might say, that's always a sign of a good book. Or you might say, I love when a story pulls you in like that. Both responses show interest and keep the conversation going. Now, let's practice reacting to opinions. Imagine someone says, I think learning languages becomes easier when you practice every single day. You might respond with agreement by saying, I completely agree. Consistency makes a huge difference. Another response could be, that's true. Even small daily practice can lead to big improvements over time. Now, imagine someone expresses a slightly different opinion. They say, sometimes I feel like studying too much at once can actually become overwhelming. You might respond thoughtfully by saying, that's a good point. Balance is definitely important when learning something new. Conversations like this allow people to exchange ideas naturally. Now, let's imagine another quick daily scenario, waiting for public transportation. Two people are standing at a bus stop. One person says, it looks like the bus might be running a little late today. The other person responds, yeah, I noticed that too. Hopefully it arrives soon. These types of conversations often happen between strangers because people share the same situation. Imagine you are part of that moment. Someone says, looks like the bus is running late. You might respond with something simple like, yeah? Hopefully it won't be too long. Or you might say, I guess we'll just have to be patient. These responses are natural and polite. Let's practice one more listening moment. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. This phrase is very common in English. It means the situation is uncertain, so the best option is to be patient and observe what happens. Now, imagine responding to that phrase. Someone says, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. You might respond with agreement by saying, yeah, sometimes that's all we can do. Another response could be, true, some things are out of our control. These small conversations may seem simple, but they're exactly the type of interactions that build advanced listening and speaking ability. When you practice them regularly, your brain becomes faster at recognizing patterns, understanding meaning, and responding naturally. As we move further into this lesson, we will explore even more situations where people speak quickly, share opinions, tell short stories, and react naturally in conversation, where each example will help you become more comfortable with real spoken English and move closer to C1 and C2 level understanding. Let's continue strengthening your ability to follow fast English conversations by imagining another everyday moment, a casual conversation that begins while two people are walking together after work. One person says, "You know, today actually turned out better than I expected." The other person replies with curiosity, "Oh, really? What happened?" The first speaker continues, "Well, this morning started off a little stressful, but by the afternoon, everything finally started falling into place." This type of expression is very common in English. When someone says that things fell into place, they mean that problems were solved and everything began working smoothly. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone tells you that their day turned out better than expected. You might respond by saying, "That's always a nice surprise." Sometimes a day can start badly, but end really well. Another natural response might be, "I'm glad to hear that. It's always satisfying when things work out in the end." These types of reactions make conversations feel supportive and positive. Let's expand the conversation further. The speaker might say, "At first I thought the whole day was going to be a disaster, but somehow everything improved." The listener responds, "It's funny how that happens sometimes. A small change can completely turn the day around." These types of reflections are very common in everyday discussions because people often talk about how their day went. So imagine someone tells you, "I thought today was going to be terrible, but it actually improved." Think about how you might respond. One natural response could be, "That's great. It's always good when things take a positive turn." Another response could be, "Yeah, sometimes we worry too much before things even happen." Practicing responses like this helps you develop conversational confidence. Now, let's move into another common situation, talking about learning new skills. Imagine two friends discussing personal development. One person says, "Lately I've been trying to improve my communication skills." The other person replies, "That's a great goal. Good communication can open so many opportunities." The first speaker continues, "Exactly. I realized that expressing ideas clearly is just as important as having good ideas." Now, imagine joining that discussion. Someone tells you they are working on their communication skills. You might respond by saying, "That's really important, especially when you want to connect with people." Another response could be, "I completely agree. Being able to express yourself clearly makes a huge difference." Now, let's turn this moment into a small speaking exercise. Imagine someone asks you, "What skill are you trying to improve these days?" Think about your response. You might say, "Right now, I'm focusing on improving my English speaking and listening skills." Another response could be, "I'm trying to become better at managing my time and staying organized." These answers sound natural because they provide a little explanation instead of just one short sentence. Let's explore another type of conversation that happens frequently, discussing plans and possibilities. Imagine someone says, "I've been thinking about starting a new hobby, but I'm not sure what to choose yet." The other person responds, "That's interesting. Have you considered learning something creative, like photography or painting? The first speaker replies, I actually thought about photography. It seems like a fun way to capture everyday moments. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says they want to start a new hobby. You might respond with curiosity by saying, That sounds like a great idea. What kind of hobbies are you interested in? Another response might be, Trying something new can be really refreshing. Conversations like this allow people to exchange ideas naturally. Let's continue imagining the discussion. One person says, I think hobbies are important because they give you a break from daily responsibilities. The other person agrees and replies, That's true. They help you relax and also keep your mind active. Notice how both speakers expand their thoughts instead of giving very short answers. This habit makes conversations richer and more engaging. Now, let's practice responding again. Imagine someone says, Hobbies are important because they help people relax. You might respond by saying, I agree. Everyone needs some time to recharge. Another response could be, Yes, and hobbies can also help people discover new talents. Practicing different responses makes your speaking more flexible. Now, let's explore a slightly different situation. A conversation about travel experiences. Imagine someone says, I recently visited a city I had never been to before, and it was an amazing experience. The listener responds with interest. That sounds exciting. What did you enjoy the most about the trip? The speaker replies, Honestly, I loved just walking around the streets and exploring the local culture. Imagine you are listening to that story. You might respond by saying, Exploring new places can be really inspiring. Another response could be, Traveling often gives you a completely new perspective. These types of responses show interest and keep the conversation flowing. Let's turn this into a practice moment. Imagine someone asks you, Do you enjoy traveling? Think about how you might answer. You could say, Yes, I enjoy traveling because it allows me to experience different cultures. Another possible answer could be, I enjoy traveling when I have the opportunity because it helps me learn new things. These responses sound natural and thoughtful. Now, let's focus on something that appears frequently in fast English conversations, expressing small doubts or uncertainties. For example, someone might say, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think the meeting might be postponed. The phrase, I'm not entirely sure, helps soften the statement. It shows that the speaker is not completely certain about the information. Imagine someone tells you, I think the meeting might be postponed. You might respond by saying, That's possible. How sometimes schedules change unexpectedly. Another response could be, Thanks for letting me know. I'll keep an eye on the updates. These responses sound polite and natural. Now, let's imagine another everyday scenario, discussing technology and daily habits. One person says, I've been trying to reduce the amount of time I spend on my phone. The other person replies, That's a challenge for a lot of people these days. The first speaker continues, Yeah, I realized that I was checking my phone too often, without even thinking about it. Now, imagine you are part of this discussion. Someone says they are trying to use their phone less frequently. You might respond by saying, I've noticed the same habit in myself sometimes. Another response could be, It's not easy, but becoming more aware of it is a good first step. These responses sound reflective and thoughtful. Let's continue the conversation. One person says, "I've started leaving my phone in another room while I work." The other person responds, "That's actually a smart strategy." The first speaker adds, "It helps me concentrate much better." This type of conversation shows how people exchange practical ideas during everyday discussions. Now, imagine someone tells you about that strategy. You might respond with interest by saying, "That sounds like something I should try as well." Another response could be, "It's amazing how small changes can improve focus." Now let's practice understanding fast storytelling. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, "Yesterday, I went out for a quick walk and somehow ended up talking with a neighbor for almost an hour." Even though the sentence is long, the meaning is simple. The speaker planned a short walk, but unexpectedly spent a long time chatting. Imagine how you might respond. You could say, "That must have been a nice conversation." Another response could be, "It's always interesting when a quick moment turns into a long discussion." Now, let's explore a deeper conversational pattern that appears at higher levels of English, reflecting on experiences. Imagine someone says, "The more I learn new things, the more I realize how much there is still to learn." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's actually a very wise perspective." The speaker continues, "Learning never really stops, and that's what makes life interesting." Imagine you are listening to that reflection. You might respond by saying, "I completely agree. Continuous learning keeps the mind active." Another response could be, "That's one of the reasons I enjoy studying languages." These responses show deeper engagement with the topic. Now, let's practice reacting to thoughtful ideas. Imagine someone says, "Learning never really ends." Your response might be, "That's true. Every new experience teaches us something." Another response could be, "I think that's what makes personal growth so exciting." As you continue practicing these conversations, your listening and speaking abilities begin to strengthen together. You start recognizing patterns, understanding expressions, and responding naturally without needing to translate every word in your mind. Now, we will continue exploring fast English conversations that include storytelling, opinions, and spontaneous reactions. Each example will help you become more comfortable understanding natural English and responding with confidence in real daily life conversations. Let's continue strengthening your ability to understand fast English conversations by moving into another common daily life situation, discussing everyday experiences that happen unexpectedly. Imagine two friends talking after a long day. One of them says, "You know what happened to me earlier today? Oh, I ran into an old friend completely by accident." The other person responds with surprise, "Really? That must have been unexpected." The speaker continues, "Yeah, I hadn't seen him in years, and suddenly we were standing in the same grocery store line." Situations like this appear often in natural conversation because people enjoy sharing small, surprising moments from their day. Now, imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response could be, "That's amazing." It's funny how small the world can feel sometimes. Another possible response could be, "Moments like that make ordinary days more interesting." Notice how both responses show engagement with the story. Instead of ending the conversation quickly, let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "We ended up talking for almost 20 minutes right there in the store." The listener laughs and replies, "That must have surprised the people waiting behind you." The speaker answers, "Probably, but nobody seemed to mind." These kinds of playful exchanges help conversations feel relaxed and friendly. Now, let's turn this moment into a speaking practice exercise. Imagine someone tells you, "I ran into an old friend today after many years." Think about your response. You might say, "That must have been a really nice surprise." Another response could be, "I always enjoy those unexpected reunions." Practicing responses like this helps your brain react naturally during conversations. Now, let's explore another everyday topic, talking about habits and personal routines. Imagine someone says, "Recently, I've been trying to develop better daily habits." The other person replies, "That sounds like a positive change. What kind of habits are you working on?" The first speaker answers, "I'm trying to wake up earlier and start the day more calmly, instead of rushing." Imagine you join this conversation. Someone says they are trying to build better habits. You might respond with encouragement by saying, "That's a great idea." A calm morning can really set the tone for the whole day. Another response could be, "It's amazing how small habits can lead to big improvements over time." These types of supportive comments are very common in friendly discussions. Let's expand the conversation further. One person says, "The hardest part is staying consistent." The other person replies, "That's true. Motivation comes and goes, but consistency is what really makes the difference." Notice how the conversation now becomes slightly deeper. Instead of only describing events, the speakers are discussing ideas. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Staying consistent is the hardest part." Think about your response. You might say, "I completely agree. Discipline is often more important than motivation." Another response could be, "Yes, but once something becomes a habit, it gets much easier." These types of statements help you express thoughtful opinions in English. Now, let's move into another common conversation topic, discussing weather and daily experiences. Imagine someone says, "The weather today feels completely different from yesterday." The other person replies, "I know, right? Yesterday was warm and sunny, and today it feels much cooler." Conversations about the weather are extremely common in English-speaking environments because they provide an easy way to start casual interaction. Imagine you are part of this conversation. Someone says, "Today feels much cooler than yesterday." You might respond by saying, "Yes, I noticed that too. The temperature dropped quite a bit." Another natural response could be, "I actually like this cooler weather. It feels refreshing." These responses show how small observations can create conversation. Now, imagine the discussion continues. One person says, "Weather changes always affect my mood a little." The other person responds, "I understand that. Sunny days always make me feel more energetic." The first speaker replies, "Exactly. There's something about sunlight that improves your mood." Conversations like this show how people connect daily experiences with personal feelings. Let's practice responding again. Imagine someone says, "Sunny days always improve my mood." You might respond with agreement by saying, "I feel the same way. Sunshine makes everything feel more positive." Another response could be, "That's true. Bright weather can make the whole day feel lighter." Practicing responses like this improves conversational fluency. Now, let's explore another scenario, discussing personal goals. Imagine someone says, "This year, I decided to focus more on personal growth." The listener responds with curiosity. "That sounds interesting. What kind of changes are you planning to make?" The speaker answers, "I want to read more books, learn new skills, and spend my time more wisely." Imagine you join the conversation. Someone says they want to focus on personal growth. You might respond by saying, "That's a really inspiring goal." Another response could be, "Improving yourself little by little can lead to huge changes over time." These responses encourage deeper conversation. Let's imagine the speaker continues. They say, "I realized that time passes quickly, so I want to use it more meaningfully." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's a very powerful realization." Conversations at advanced levels often include reflections like this, where people talk about life experiences and personal development. Now, imagine someone says to you, "I want to use my time more meaningfully." Think about how you might respond. You could say, "That's a great mindset to have." Another response might be, "Making the most of your time can really improve your life." These responses help you express thoughtful ideas naturally. Now, let's explore a slightly different conversational style, sharing funny daily experiences. Imagine someone says, "You won't believe what happened during my commute this morning." The listener responds with interest, "What happened?" The speaker laughs and says, "I got on the wrong bus," without realizing it. The listener replies, "That must have been confusing." Imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response might be, "I've done something similar before." Another response could be, "At least it gave you an interesting story to tell." These kinds of responses show empathy and humor. Now, imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "I didn't realize my mistake until the bus started heading in the opposite direction." The listener laughs and says, "That must have been quite a surprise." The speaker replies, "Yeah, but luckily I figured it out quickly." These exchanges show how storytelling works in natural English conversations. Let's practice responding again. Imagine someone says, "I accidentally got on the wrong bus." You might respond by saying, "That sounds frustrating." Another response could be, "At least you realized it before going too far." Practicing different reactions helps you become more flexible in conversation. Now, let's focus on another key element of advanced English conversation, expressing agreement and understanding. Imagine someone says, "Sometimes life becomes so busy that we forget to slow down." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's very true." The speaker continues, "Taking small breaks can really improve your mental clarity." Imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, "I completely agree. Short breaks can help us recharge." Another response could be, "That's why balance is so important in daily life." These responses demonstrate thoughtful conversation. Let's practice another moment of reflection. Imagine someone says, "Life moves quickly, and we should appreciate the small moments." Think about how you might respond. One answer could be, "That's a beautiful way to think about life." Another response could be, "Yes, sometimes the simplest moments are the most meaningful." Now, imagine a final short conversation practice exercise of the lesson. One person says, "The more I practice English, the more comfortable I feel speaking it. The other person responds, "That's exactly how improvement works. Practice builds confidence." The first speaker adds, "And confidence makes conversations much easier." Now, imagine someone says that to you. "The more I practice English, the more confident I become." You might respond by saying, "That's wonderful progress." Another response could be, "Consistency really pays off when learning a language." These types of encouraging conversations help maintain motivation. As you continue listening to and practicing conversations like these, your brain gradually becomes more comfortable processing fast English. Now you begin to recognize patterns, expressions, and natural rhythms that appear repeatedly in real conversations. Now, we will continue exploring more advanced conversational situations where people share experiences, express opinions, and react naturally to each other in everyday English. Let's continue developing your ability to understand fast English conversations by stepping into another natural daily life moment, a relaxed conversation between two people who are reflecting on their day while walking outside in the evening. One person says, "You know, sometimes I feel like the day disappears before I even realize it." The other person nods and replies, "I know exactly what you mean. Some days feel incredibly short." This type of observation appears frequently in natural English conversations because people often talk about how quickly time passes during busy days. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says, "The day disappears before I even realize it." A natural response could be, "Yeah, time seems to move faster when you have a lot to do." Another possible response might be, "I've noticed the same thing. When you're focused on work or learning, hours can pass without you noticing." These responses keep the conversation flowing, while also sharing your perspective. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "That's why I've been trying to slow down a little in the evenings." The listener asks, "White, what do you usually do to relax after a long day?" The speaker replies, "Sometimes I go for a walk. Sometimes I listen to music. And sometimes I just sit quietly and reflect on the day." These types of reflective conversations are very common among fluent speakers because they naturally lead to deeper discussion. Now, imagine someone asks you the same question. What do you usually do to relax after a long day? Think about how you might respond. You could say, "I usually spend some time practicing English or reading something interesting." Another response could be, "I like taking a short walk because it helps clear my mind." Practicing answers like these prepares you for real-life conversations. Now, so let's move into another situation that appears frequently in fast English conversations, discussing work or daily responsibilities. Imagine one person says, "Today was a bit more challenging than I expected." The other person responds with interest, "Oh, really? What made it challenging?" The speaker explains, "There were several unexpected tasks that appeared during the day." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone tells you their day was challenging. You might respond by saying, "That happens sometimes. Unexpected tasks can change your entire schedule." Another natural response could be, "I understand that feeling. Some days become much busier than we planned." These responses show empathy and understanding. Let's continue the conversation. The speaker says, Even though it was a busy day, I learned a few useful things. The listener replies, "That's a great way to look at it." The speaker continues, "Every challenge can teach us something valuable." Conversations like this show how fluent speakers often reflect positively on experiences. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Every challenge can teach us something." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a very good perspective." Another response could be, "Yes, challenges often help us grow." These responses sound thoughtful and natural. Now, let's explore another everyday topic, talking about personal motivation. Imagine someone says, "Lately I've been trying to stay more motivated when learning new things." The listener responds, "That's important. Motivation can make a huge difference." The speaker continues, "I realized that small daily progress is better than waiting for perfect conditions." Imagine you are listening to that idea. You might respond by saying, "That's true. Small steps can lead to big results over time." Another response could be, "Consistency often matters more than speed." These responses reflect deeper thinking. Let's turn this moment into a speaking exercise. Imagine someone asks you, "How do you stay motivated when learning something new?" Think about your answer. You might say, "I remind myself that every small improvement brings me closer to my goal." Another possible answer could be, "I try to practice regularly and focus on progress instead of perfection." These responses sound confident and thoughtful. Now, let's move into another common situation, discussing daily routines. Imagine someone says, "Shia, my mornings used to feel very rushed, but recently I've been trying to organize them better." The listener replies, "That sounds like a positive change." The speaker explains, "I started preparing things the night before, so my mornings feel calmer." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says they want calmer mornings. You might respond by saying, "That's a really smart strategy." Another response could be, "Preparing in advance can make mornings much easier." These types of responses show practical understanding. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "Now, I feel less stressed when the day begins." The listener responds, "Starting the day calmly can influence your entire mood." The speaker agrees and says, "Exactly. It helps me think more clearly." Now, imagine someone says to you, "Shay, starting the day calmly improves your mood." You might respond by saying, "I completely agree." Another response could be, "That's why morning routines are so important." These responses demonstrate thoughtful engagement. Now, let's explore another conversational pattern that appears often in fast English, expressing curiosity about experiences. Imagine someone says, "Yesterday I tried something completely new." The listener immediately asks, "What did you try?" The speaker replies, "I tried learning a few phrases in another language just for fun." Now, imagine you respond to that story. You might say, "That sounds interesting." Another response could be, "Learning new languages can be really enjoyable." These responses show curiosity and encouragement. Let's continue the story. The speaker says, "It reminded me how exciting it feels to learn something new." The listener responds, "That's one of the best parts of learning." Conversations like this often shift from simple storytelling to deeper reflections about personal growth. Now, imagine someone says to you, Learning something new always feels exciting. Think about your response. You might say, "Yes, it keeps life interesting." Another response could be, "It also helps expand your perspective." These responses sound thoughtful and natural. Now, let's explore another realistic conversation scenario, discussing technology and modern life. Imagine someone says, "Technology has changed the way we communicate so much." The listener responds, "That's definitely true." The speaker continues, "Sometimes it feels like the world moves faster because of it." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says technology has changed communication. You might respond by saying, "Yes, communication has become much quicker and more convenient." Another response could be, "At the same time, it's important to maintain real human connection." These responses demonstrate balanced thinking. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "Even though technology is helpful, I still enjoy face-to-face conversations the most." The listener replies, "There's something special about direct human interaction." These types of reflections appear often in thoughtful discussions. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Face-to-face conversations feel more meaningful." You might respond by saying, "I agree." They allow people to connect more deeply. Another response could be, "Body language and tone make communication clearer." These responses add depth to the conversation. Now, let's practice understanding a quick storytelling moment. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, "I plan to spend just 10 minutes checking my messages, but somehow I ended up scrolling through my phone for almost an hour." Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning is simple. The speaker intended to spend a short time, but ended up spending much longer. Now, imagine your response. You might say, "That happens to me more often than I'd like to admit." Another response could be, "Time really disappears when you're looking at your phone." These responses feel natural and relatable. Now, let's explore another conversational pattern, discussing personal reflections. Imagine someone says, "The older I get, the more I appreciate quiet moments." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's an interesting perspective." The speaker continues, "Sometimes peace and simplicity are more valuable than constant excitement." Imagine you are listening to that idea. You might respond by saying, "That's a very wise way to look at life." Another response could be, "Simple moments can bring the greatest happiness." These responses demonstrate deeper engagement with the topic. As you continue listening to and practicing conversations like these, your mind gradually becomes more comfortable with fast English. You begin recognizing expressions, reacting naturally, and expressing your own thoughts with greater confidence. Now, we will continue exploring more fast-paced conversations from everyday life, where people exchange opinions, tell short stories, and react naturally to each other. Let's continue building your ability to understand fast English conversations by imagining another very natural moment in daily life, a casual conversation that begins when two people are waiting somewhere together. One person says, "It feels like today has been one long, busy day." The other person responds with a small laugh and says, "Yeah, it definitely feels that way." The first speaker continues, "I had several things planned, but somehow the day became much busier than expected." Situations like this are very common in English conversations because people often share small updates about their day. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says, "Today turned out much busier than I expected." A natural response could be, "That happens more often than we think." Another response could be, "Some days just seem to fill up with unexpected tasks." Both responses sound natural because they show understanding and empathy. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "At one point, I thought I would never finish everything I needed to do." The listener responds, "But somehow you managed to get through it." The speaker nods and says, "Yes, and now I finally feel a sense of relief." Conversations like this reflect the way people naturally talk about challenges and small victories during their day. Now, imagine someone tells you, "I finally finished everything I needed to do today." Think about your response. You might say, "That must feel very satisfying." Another response could be, "It's always a good feeling when you accomplish your tasks." Practicing responses like this helps you maintain smooth conversation. Now, let's move into another everyday topic, discussing learning and improvement. Imagine someone says, "The more I practice English conversations, the more comfortable I feel speaking." The listener replies, "That's exactly how progress happens." The speaker continues, "At first it felt difficult, but now it feels much more natural." This type of reflection appears frequently when people talk about learning a new skill. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says, "Practice makes speaking feel more natural." You might respond by saying, "Yes, repetition helps the brain build confidence." Another response could be, "Consistent practice can make a huge difference." These responses show thoughtful agreement. Let's expand the conversation further. The speaker says, "I realized that listening carefully is just as important as speaking." The listener responds, "That's a great observation." The speaker continues, "When you listen more, so you start noticing how native speakers actually express ideas." Conversations like this help learners understand the importance of listening skills. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Listening carefully improves speaking ability." Think about your response. You might say, "That's very true." Another response could be, "Understanding how people speak naturally is extremely helpful." These responses sound thoughtful and natural. Now, let's explore another situation that appears frequently in daily conversation. Talking about future plans. Imagine someone says, "I've been thinking about trying something new this year." The listener responds with curiosity, "What kind of new things are you considering?" The speaker replies, "I'm thinking about learning a completely new skill." Imagine you join this conversation. Someone says they want to learn something new. You might respond by saying, "That sounds exciting." Another response could be, "Learning something new can be very rewarding." These responses keep the conversation flowing. Let's imagine the speaker continues. They say, "Trying new things keeps life interesting." The listener responds, "That's definitely true." The speaker continues, "Sometimes stepping outside your comfort zone leads to the best experiences." These kinds of conversations are common when people discuss personal growth. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Stepping outside your comfort zone can lead to great experiences." Think about your response. You might say, "I completely agree." Another response could be, growth often happens when we try something unfamiliar. Practicing responses like these helps you express thoughtful ideas. Now, let's explore another everyday conversation topic, discussing simple daily activities. Imagine someone says, I decided to take a short walk this morning before starting work. The listener replies, that sounds like a refreshing way to start the day. The speaker continues, it really helped me clear my mind. Now, imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, walking can be very relaxing. Another response could be, fresh air always improves my mood. These responses are simple but natural. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, sometimes the simplest habits make the biggest difference. The listener responds thoughtfully, that's very true. The speaker continues, small positive habits can slowly improve your life. These reflective statements often appear in conversations between people discussing lifestyle improvements. Now, imagine someone tells you, small habits can improve your life. Think about your response. You might say, that's a powerful idea. Another response could be, consistency with small habits can create big results. These responses show thoughtful engagement. Now, let's explore another conversational pattern, talking about unexpected events. Imagine someone says, earlier today, something funny happened to me. The listener responds with curiosity, what happened? The speaker laughs and says, I waved at someone because I thought they were my friend, but it turned out to be a stranger. The listener laughs and replies, that must have been a little awkward. Now, imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response could be, that happens sometimes. Another response could be, I think everyone has experienced something like that. These responses show empathy and humor. Let's imagine the speaker continues. They say, luckily, the stranger laughed too. The listener responds, that's good. At least it turned into a funny moment. Conversations like this often turn small, embarrassing situations into humorous stories. Now, imagine someone tells you that story. Think about your response. You might say, at least it became a funny memory. Another response could be, moments like that make life more interesting. These responses sound relaxed and natural. Now, let's move into another conversational pattern, sharing personal reflections about time and life. Imagine someone says, the older I get, the more I realize how valuable time really is. The listener responds thoughtfully, that's a very meaningful realization. The speaker continues, it makes me want to spend my time more wisely. Imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, that's a powerful perspective. Another response could be, time is one of the most valuable things we have. These responses show thoughtful engagement. Now, let's practice understanding fast-spoken storytelling. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, I went out to run a quick errand and somehow ended up having a long conversation with someone I met. Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning is clear. The speaker planned something short, but ended up spending much more time talking. Now, imagine how you might respond. You could say, that sounds like a pleasant surprise. Another response could be, conversations sometimes appear when we least expect them. These responses feel natural and conversational. Now, let's explore another reflective conversation. Imagine someone says, Every conversation teaches us something if we really listen. The listener responds thoughtfully. That's a very insightful idea. The speaker continues. Listening carefully helps us understand people better. Conversations like this show deeper communication. Imagine someone says to you, "Listening helps us understand people better." Think about your response. You might say, "That's absolutely true." Another response could be, Listening is one of the most important communication skills." These responses express agreement. As you continue practicing these types of conversations, your brain becomes more comfortable with the speed and rhythm of natural English. The more you listen and respond to real conversational patterns, the easier it becomes to understand fast speech and express your own ideas clearly. Now, we will continue exploring more advanced conversations that include storytelling, opinions, reflections, and spontaneous reactions that often appear in real-life English interactions. Let's start with another situation that happens very often in everyday life. A relaxed conversation between friends who are reflecting on small experiences from their day. Imagine someone saying, Today I realized something interesting." The other person becomes curious and replies, "Oh, really? What did you realize?" The first speaker continues calmly. "I realized that sometimes we rush through our day so quickly that we don't notice the small moments happening around us." Conversations like this often begin with simple observations that lead to deeper reflections. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone tells you that people often rush through their day without noticing small moments. A natural response could be, "That's actually very true." Another response might be, "I've noticed the same thing." Sometimes we're so focused on the next task that we forget to enjoy the present moment. These types of responses show that you are thinking about the idea instead of just hearing it. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "Today I decided to slow down for a few minutes and just observe what was happening around me." The listener responds, "And what did you notice?" The speaker answers, "I noticed people talking, laughing, and enjoying simple conversations." This type of observation appears often when people reflect on daily life. Now, imagine someone tells you this story. You might respond by saying, "That sounds like a peaceful moment." Another response could be, "Sometimes slowing down helps us see things more clearly." These responses keep the conversation calm and thoughtful. Let's explore another everyday conversation scenario, discussing how people manage their time. Imagine someone says, "Lately I've been trying to organize my time better." The listener replies with interest, "That sounds like a useful habit to develop." The speaker continues, "I realized that when I plan my day carefully, everything feels less stressful." Now, imagine you join this conversation. Someone says they are organizing their time better. You might respond by saying, "Planning your day can really improve productivity." Another response could be, Having a clear plan often reduces unnecessary stress." These types of responses show thoughtful engagement with the topic. Let's continue the discussion. The speaker says, "Before I started planning, I often felt overwhelmed." The listener replies, "I understand that feeling." The speaker adds, "But now, I feel more in control of my daily schedule." Conversations like this often involve sharing personal improvements. Now, Imagine someone tells you, "Planning my schedule makes me feel more in control." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a great benefit of good organization." Another response could be, "Feeling in control of your time can make life much easier." Practicing responses like these strengthens conversational fluency. Now, let's explore another natural situation. A conversation about learning experiences. Imagine someone says, "I learned something new today that surprised me." The listener responds with curiosity, "What did you learn?" The speaker replies, "I learned that practicing something regularly makes improvement happen faster than I expected." Now, imagine you respond to that statement. You might say, "That's a very valuable lesson." Another response could be, "Consistency really is the key to improvement." These responses show agreement and reflection. Let's expand the conversation. The speaker says, "At first, progress feels slow, but eventually you begin to notice real change." The listener replies, "That's exactly how learning works." The speaker continues, Patience and persistence are incredibly important." These types of conversations often happen when people discuss personal growth. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Patience and persistence are important for learning." Think about your response. You might say, "I completely agree." Another response could be, "Those qualities make long-term success possible." These responses demonstrate thoughtful communication. Now, let's move into another common conversation topic: discussing experiences during the day. Imagine someone says, "Earlier today, I had a really interesting conversation with a stranger." The listener responds with curiosity, "That sounds intriguing. What was the conversation about?" The speaker replies, "We started talking about travel, and suddenly, we were sharing stories about different places." Now, I'd imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response could be, "Conversations like that can be surprisingly enjoyable." Another response might be, "Sometimes strangers have the most interesting stories." These responses show curiosity and engagement. Let's imagine the speaker continues. They say, "It reminded me how powerful simple conversations can be." The listener replies thoughtfully, "That's true. A good conversation can change your mood instantly." The speaker adds, "It's amazing how human connection works." Conversations like this often move toward deeper reflections about communication. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Simple conversations can improve your mood." Think about your response. You might say, "That's definitely true." Another response could be, "Talking with people often creates positive energy." These responses show thoughtful agreement. Now, let's explore another conversational pattern: sharing reflections about learning languages. Imagine someone says, "Learning a new language changes the way you see the world." The listener responds with interest, "How do you mean?" The speaker explains, "When you understand another language, you also understand another culture and way of thinking." Now, imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, "That's a fascinating perspective." Another response could be, "Language really does open doors to new ideas." These responses show deeper engagement with the topic. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "It also helps you connect with more people." The listener replies, "That's one of the greatest benefits of learning languages." Conversations like this often appear among learners discussing their experiences. Now, Imagine someone says to you, "Learning languages helps you connect with more people." Think about your response. You might say, "That's one of the reasons I enjoy learning English." Another response could be, "Communication becomes much richer when you understand multiple languages." These responses sound natural and thoughtful. Now, let's practice understanding a quick spoken story. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, "I was planning to spend a quiet evening at home, but a friend called, and suddenly we were talking for almost 2 hours." Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning is simple. The speaker expected a quiet evening, but ended up having a long conversation. Now, imagine how you might respond. You could say, "That sounds like a pleasant surprise." Another response could be, "Good conversations can make time pass quickly." These responses feel natural. Now, let's explore another reflective conversation. Imagine someone says, "Sometimes the best moments of the day are completely unexpected." The listener responds thoughtfully, "I think that's very true." The speaker continues, "Life often surprises us in small but meaningful ways." Imagine someone says that to you. Think about your response. You might say, "That's a beautiful way to look at life." Another response could be, "Unexpected moments often become the most memorable." These responses show thoughtful engagement. Now, let's imagine one final conversation practice of the lesson. Someone says, "The more I practice speaking English, the more confident I feel expressing my ideas." The listener replies encouragingly, "That's fantastic progress." The speaker continues, "Confidence really grows with practice." Now, imagine someone says to you, "Confidence grows with practice." Think about your response. You might say, "That's completely true." Another response could be, "See, practice builds both skill and confidence." These responses show agreement and encouragement. As you continue practicing these kinds of conversations, you train your mind to follow fast English naturally. The more you listen to realistic dialogues and respond with your own ideas, the easier it becomes to participate in real conversations without hesitation. Now, we will continue exploring more natural English conversations that include storytelling, opinions, spontaneous reactions, and thoughtful reflections from daily life. Let's start with another very natural moment in daily conversation, a situation where people begin talking about how their day unfolded. Imagine someone saying, "You know, today started out pretty ordinary, but by the afternoon, it became surprisingly interesting." The other person responds with curiosity and says, "Oh, really? What changed?" The speaker continues calmly, "I had an unexpected conversation with someone that made me think about a few things differently." Conversations like this appear frequently in real life because people enjoy sharing the small experiences that make their day memorable. Now, imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response might be, "That sounds intriguing." Another response could be, "Sometimes the most interesting conversations happen unexpectedly." Both responses show interest and encourage the speaker to continue sharing their experience. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "At first it was just a casual discussion, but eventually we started talking about learning, goals, and how people grow over time." The listener replies thoughtfully, "Those kinds of conversations can really make you reflect on your own life." The speaker nods and adds, "Exactly. It reminded me how important it is to keep learning. These types of discussions often happen when people connect through meaningful conversation. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Talking about learning reminded me how important growth is." Think about how you might respond. You might say, "That's a really powerful realization." Another response could be, "Continuous growth keeps life exciting." Practicing responses like these helps you express thoughtful ideas naturally. Now, let's explore another everyday topic, discussing how people handle busy schedules. Imagine someone says, "Lately, I've been trying to balance work, learning, and relaxation more carefully." The listener replies with interest, "That sounds like a wise approach." The speaker continues, "I realize that if I focus only on work, I start feeling exhausted." Now, imagine you are part of this conversation. Someone says they want to balance their time better. You might respond by saying, "Balance is definitely important for long-term productivity." Another response could be, "Taking time to relax helps you maintain energy." These types of responses show understanding and thoughtful reflection. Let's imagine the speaker continues sharing their thoughts. They say, "When I take short breaks, I actually feel more focused when I return to my work." The listener responds, "That makes perfect sense." The speaker adds, "Sometimes stepping away for a moment can refresh your mind." Conversations like this often involve discussing small habits that improve daily life. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Short breaks improve focus." Think about your response. You might say, "I completely agree with that." Another response could be, "A refreshed mind always works better." These responses show agreement while maintaining the natural flow of conversation. Now, let's explore another type of daily conversation, discussing memorable experiences. Imagine someone says, "Earlier today, I remembered a funny moment from a few years ago." The listener replies with curiosity, "What happened?" The speaker laughs and says, "I accidentally sent a message to the wrong person, and it created a very awkward situation." Now, imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response might be, "That must have been embarrassing at the moment." Another response could be, "I think everyone has experienced something similar." These responses show empathy and humor. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "At the time it felt uncomfortable, but now it's actually a funny memory." The listener replies, "Sometimes awkward moments become the best stories later." The speaker nods and says, "Exactly. Time has a way of changing how we see things." Now, imagine someone tells you that awkward moments eventually become funny memories. Think about your response. You might say, "That's very true." Another response could be, "Time often turns embarrassment into humor." Practicing responses like these helps you express ideas more naturally. Now, let's move into another conversation scenario, discussing how people learn from experience. Imagine someone says, "Every experience teaches us something if we pay attention." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's a very meaningful perspective." The speaker continues, "Even small experiences can contain valuable lessons." Now, imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, "That's an excellent point." Another response could be, "Life really is a continuous learning process." These responses show thoughtful engagement. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "Sometimes the lessons we learn are simple but powerful." The listener replies, Often, the simplest lessons stay with us the longest. Conversations like this often become reflective and philosophical. Now, imagine someone tells you, simple lessons often stay with us the longest. Think about your response. You might say, "That's a very wise observation." Another response could be, "Simple ideas can have deep meaning." These responses demonstrate thoughtful communication. Now, let's explore another everyday conversation topic, discussing personal interests. Imagine someone says, "Recently, I've been exploring new topics that I never paid attention to before." The listener responds with interest. "That sounds exciting. What kind of topics?" The speaker replies, "I've been reading about psychology, communication, and how people think." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says they are exploring new topics. You might respond by saying, "That sounds very interesting." Another response could be, "Learning about how people think can be fascinating." These responses show curiosity and engagement. Let's imagine the speaker continues. They say, "The more I learn about human behavior, the more I understand everyday conversations." The listener replies thoughtfully, "That's a valuable insight." Conversations like this often appear when people discuss intellectual interests. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Understanding human behavior improves communication." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a great observation." Another response could be, "Communication becomes easier when we understand people better." These responses express thoughtful agreement. Now, let's practice understanding a quick spoken moment. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, "I planned to spend just a few minutes organizing my desk, but somehow I ended up rearranging the entire room." Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning is clear. The speaker intended to do something small, but became deeply involved in the activity. Now, imagine your response. You might say, "That happens more often than we expect." Another response could be, "Sometimes small tasks turn into big projects." These responses feel natural. Now, let's explore another reflective conversation. Imagine someone says, "The more I observe life, the more I realize how important communication really is." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's absolutely true." The speaker continues, "Communication connects people, ideas, and experiences." Imagine someone says that to you. Think about your response. You might say, "Communication truly shapes our relationships." Another response could be, "Understanding each other depends on good communication." These responses demonstrate deeper thinking. Now, let's imagine one final conversation practice exercise of the lesson. Someone says, "Learning to express ideas clearly is one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop." The listener responds encouragingly, "That's a very important skill." The speaker continues, "Clear communication helps people share knowledge and build strong connections." Now, imagine someone says to you, "Clear communication builds strong connections." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a powerful idea." Another response could be, "Communication really is the foundation of understanding." These responses sound thoughtful and natural. As you continue listening to and practicing conversations like these, your ability to understand fast English improves steadily. Your brain becomes more comfortable recognizing patterns, understanding meaning quickly, and responding naturally in conversation. Now, we will continue exploring more fast English conversations from everyday life that include storytelling, opinions, reflections, and spontaneous reactions. Let's start with another very familiar situation that happens in everyday life. A casual conversation that begins when people are reflecting on how their day unfolded. Imagine someone saying, "You know, today made me realize how quickly things can change." The other person responds with curiosity and says, "What do you mean?" The speaker continues calmly, "This morning I thought the whole day would be stressful, but by the evening, everything felt completely different." Conversations like this often begin with small reflections that lead to deeper ideas. Now, imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response might be, "That happens more often than we expect." Another response could be, "Sometimes the day surprises us in unexpected ways." These types of responses show understanding while keeping the conversation flowing naturally. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "It reminded me that we shouldn't judge the whole day based on one moment." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's actually a very wise way to think about it." The speaker adds, "Che, sometimes patience allows things to improve." Conversations like this are common when people reflect on experiences. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Patience allows situations to improve." Think about your response. You might say, "I completely agree." Another response could be, "Patience often brings better outcomes." These responses sound thoughtful and natural. Now, let's move into another everyday discussion, talking about the importance of learning and curiosity. Imagine someone says, "One thing I've learned recently is that curiosity keeps the mind active." The listener responds with interest, "That's an interesting idea." The speaker continues, "When we stay curious, we keep discovering new things about the world." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says curiosity keeps the mind active. You might respond by saying, "That's very true." Another response could be, "Curiosity often leads to new opportunities." These responses show thoughtful agreement. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "The moment we stop asking questions, we stop learning." The listener replies thoughtfully, "That's a powerful statement." Conversations like this often appear when people discuss personal growth and knowledge. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Asking questions keeps learning alive." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a great perspective." Another response could be, "Questions are the beginning of understanding." These responses show deeper engagement. Now, let's explore another conversation that appears often in daily life. Discussing daily observations. Imagine someone says, "I've noticed that people often underestimate how powerful simple conversations can be." The listener responds with curiosity, "What do you mean by that?" The speaker explains, "Sometimes a short conversation can change your mood or even your perspective." Now, imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, "That's definitely true." Another response could be, "Conversations can influence the way we think." These responses sound natural and thoughtful. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "Even a small exchange of ideas can inspire someone." The listener replies, "That's one of the beautiful things about communication." Conversations like this show how people often reflect on the importance of human connection. Now, Imagine someone tells you, small conversations can inspire people. Think about your response. You might say, "That's a wonderful idea." Another response could be, "Communication can have a powerful impact." These responses keep the conversation thoughtful. Now, let's explore another realistic daily life conversation, discussing personal habits. Imagine someone says, "Recently I've been trying to become more mindful of how I spend my time." The listener responds with interest. "That sounds like a positive goal." The speaker continues, "I realized that small changes in daily habits can make a big difference." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says they want to be more mindful with their time. You might respond by saying, "That's a very valuable habit." Another response could be, "Being mindful can improve many areas of life." These responses sound reflective. Let's imagine the speaker continues. They say, "When you pay attention to how you spend your time, you start making better decisions." The listener replies thoughtfully, "That's very true." Conversations like this often appear when people discuss personal improvement. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Paying attention to your time helps you make better decisions." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a great insight." Another response could be, "Awareness often leads to better choices." These responses express thoughtful agreement. Now, let's explore another conversational pattern, sharing a quick story about daily life. Imagine someone says, "Earlier today, I started talking with someone I had never met before." The listener responds with curiosity, "How did that happen?" The speaker replies, "We were both waiting in line, and the conversation just started naturally." Now, imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response might be, "That's interesting." Another response could be, "Sometimes the best conversations begin unexpectedly." These responses show curiosity and engagement. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "We ended up discussing books, travel, and learning new skills." The listener replies, "That sounds like a meaningful conversation." Conversations like this show how people connect through shared interests. Now, imagine someone tells you that story. Think about your response. You might say, "That must have been an enjoyable discussion." Another response could be, "Conversations like that can be very inspiring." These responses sound natural. Now, let's practice understanding a fast-spoken moment. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, "I thought I would only spend a few minutes organizing my notes, but before I knew it, an entire hour had passed." Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning is clear. The speaker expected to spend a short time, but became deeply focused on the task. Now, imagine your response. You might say, "That happens when you become completely focused." Another response could be, "Time passes quickly when you're engaged in something interesting." These responses feel natural. Now, let's explore another reflective conversation. Imagine someone says, "Life often teaches us lessons through everyday experiences." The listener responds thoughtfully, "That's very true." The speaker continues, "Sometimes the most important lessons appear in simple moments." Imagine someone says that to you. Think about your response. You might say, "That's a beautiful thought." Another response could be, "Simple moments often carry deep meaning." These responses sound thoughtful. Now, let's imagine one final conversation As we approach the end of this lesson, someone says, "The more I practice English conversations, the easier it becomes to express my thoughts." The listener responds encouragingly, "That's wonderful progress." The speaker continues, "Confidence grows when we practice regularly." Now, imagine someone says to you, "So confidence grows through practice." Think about your response. You might say, "That's absolutely true." Another response could be, "Practice turns effort into ability." These responses show agreement and encouragement. As you continue practicing conversations like these, your listening skills become stronger, and your speaking ability becomes more natural. You begin to recognize the rhythm of fast English conversations, understand expressions quickly, and respond with confidence. With consistent practice and attention to natural conversation patterns, you can gradually move toward a level of English understanding where fast conversations feel comfortable and engaging. Over time, your ability to understand and participate in English discussions will continue to grow. Let's start with one more natural situation that often happens in everyday life. A moment when people begin reflecting on the small lessons they've learned during the day. Imagine someone saying, "You know, today reminded me how important it is to stay patient when things don't go exactly as planned." The other person listens carefully and responds, "What happened?" The speaker continues calmly, "A few small problems appeared during the day, but instead of reacting immediately, I decided to stay calm and think about the situation first." Conversations like this often appear when people talk about personal experiences and the lessons they learn from them. Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone tells you that staying patient helped them handle a difficult situation. A natural response might be, "That sounds like a very wise approach." Another response could be, "Patience often helps us see solutions more clearly." These responses sound thoughtful and supportive. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "In the past, I might have reacted quickly, but now I try to pause and think before responding." The listener replies thoughtfully, "That kind of self-awareness is very valuable." The speaker adds, "It helps avoid unnecessary stress." Conversations like this show how people reflect on personal growth and emotional intelligence. Now, imagine someone tells you, "Pausing before reacting helps avoid stress." Think about your response. You might say, "That's a very useful habit." Another response could be, "Taking a moment to think can change the entire situation." These responses help maintain meaningful conversation. Now, let's explore another daily life discussion, talking about how learning gradually builds confidence. Imagine someone says, "I've noticed that the more I practice something, the more confident I become." The listener responds with agreement, "That's completely true." The speaker continues, "At first, everything feels difficult, but slowly it becomes easier." Now, imagine you are part of that conversation. Someone says practice builds confidence. You might respond by saying, "Yes. Improvement often happens little by little." Another response could be, "Confidence grows through consistent effort." These responses sound natural and thoughtful. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, "Sometimes people expect progress to happen instantly, but real improvement takes time." The listener replies, "That's a very important reminder." Conversations like this often appear when people discuss learning processes. Now, imagine someone tells you, real improvement takes time. Think about your response. You might say, that's a very realistic perspective. Another response could be, patience is part of every learning journey. These responses demonstrate thoughtful engagement. Now, let's explore another conversation scenario. Discussing the value of communication. Imagine someone says, good communication can solve many misunderstandings. The listener responds thoughtfully, that's definitely true. The speaker continues, when people express their ideas clearly, problems become easier to resolve. Now, imagine you respond to that idea. You might say, clear communication makes cooperation easier. Another response could be, just understanding each other is the foundation of strong relationships. These responses show thoughtful reflection. Let's imagine the speaker continues sharing their thoughts. They say, listening carefully is just as important as speaking clearly. The listener responds, that's a powerful point. Conversations like this highlight the importance of balanced communication. Now, imagine someone says to you, listening is just as important as speaking. Think about your response. You might say, that's absolutely true. Another response could be, good listeners often understand people more deeply. These responses sound natural. Now, let's explore another moment of reflection that often appears in everyday conversation. Imagine someone says, sometimes the most valuable lessons come from ordinary experiences. The listener responds thoughtfully, I completely agree. The speaker continues, daily life is full of opportunities to learn if we pay attention. Now, imagine you respond to that statement. You might say, that's a wonderful perspective. Another response could be, simple experiences often carry meaningful lessons. These responses show thoughtful agreement. Let's imagine the conversation continues. The speaker says, even small conversations can teach us something about people. The listener replies, that's one of the reasons communication is so fascinating. Conversations like this often appear when people discuss human interaction. Now, imagine someone tells you, small conversations can teach us about people. Think about your response. You might say, that's a very insightful observation. Another response could be, every conversation reveals something new. These responses demonstrate deeper thinking. Now, let's practice understanding another fast-spoken moment. Imagine someone speaking quickly and saying, I thought I would just review a few notes for a couple of minutes, but before I realized it, I had spent nearly an hour studying. Even though the sentence moves quickly, the meaning remains clear. The speaker planned a short activity but became deeply engaged in learning. Now, imagine your response. You might say, that's a great sign of focus. Another response could be, time passes quickly when you're learning something interesting. These responses sound natural and conversational. Now, let's explore one more reflective conversation. Imagine someone says, the more I observe daily life, the more I appreciate simple moments. The listener responds thoughtfully, that's a beautiful perspective. The speaker continues, simple moments often bring the greatest sense of peace. Imagine someone says that to you. Think about your response. You might say, that's a very meaningful idea. Another response could be, sometimes simplicity brings the deepest happiness. These responses show thoughtful engagement. Now, imagine a final small conversation between two people discussing progress in learning English. One person says, "When I first started learning English, fast conversations felt impossible to understand." The other person responds with curiosity, "And how do you feel about them now?" The speaker smiles and says, "Now, I can follow conversations much more easily because I practice listening and speaking regularly." Imagine you are listening to that story. A natural response might be, "That's fantastic progress." Another response could be, "Consistent practice really makes a difference." These responses show encouragement. Let's imagine the speaker adds one final thought. They say, "The most important thing is to keep practicing and stay curious." The listener responds with agreement. Curiosity keeps the learning process alive. Conversations like this often appear when people reflect on personal growth and language learning. Now, imagine someone says to you, "Stay curious and keep practicing." Think about your response. You might say, "That's excellent advice." Another response could be, "Continuous practice leads to lasting improvement." These responses sound thoughtful and natural. By continuing to listen carefully, practice regularly, and engage in conversations like these, your ability to understand fast English naturally becomes stronger. Over time, your mind becomes more comfortable with the rhythm, expressions, and patterns of real English conversations, allowing you to participate with confidence and clarity. Thank you so much for spending this time practicing English with me today. I truly appreciate that you stayed focused and continued learning all the way through this lesson. When you dedicate time to listening carefully, thinking about the conversations, and practicing your responses, you are training your brain to understand English more naturally and confidently. Remember that reaching higher levels like C1 and C2 does not happen overnight. It happens step by step, through consistent practice. Every conversation you listen to, every sentence you repeat, and every idea you express brings you one step closer to speaking English more fluently and comfortably. Even if progress sometimes feels slow, every small improvement is building a stronger foundation for your communication skills. Try to continue practicing in your daily life. Listen to natural English conversations, repeat useful phrases, and imagine how you would respond in different situations. The more you expose yourself to real conversational English, the easier it becomes to understand fast speech and express your own thoughts clearly. Most importantly, stay curious and enjoy the learning process. Language learning is not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about connecting with people, sharing ideas, and understanding the world from new perspectives. If you enjoyed practicing English with me today, make sure you continue learning with our future lessons as well. Keep practicing, stay motivated, and continue moving forward on your English journey. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next lesson.